Mara Voss stood alone at the center podium of the Grand Deliberation Chamber on Astra Prime, the seat of the Galaxy Council. She was Earth's senior legal envoy, 46 years old, calm under pressure, and here for one reason. She had come to stop the Council from branding humanity as a covert threat. The chamber was built to make individuals feel small. 6 rings of stone and light rose above the floor, filled with delegates, advisors, military observers, and press nodes. Above them floated the Council seal, a slow-turning field of pale metal and glass. Beneath it sat the bench that could strip a world of rights with a formal vote. Earth had been summoned under emergency review. On paper, the charge sounded technical. In truth, everyone in the room knew what it meant. Humanity was accused of building a hidden communications system outside Council control. That system had intercepted restricted distress traffic and crossed interstellar law. If the Council proved intent, Earth would lose sovereign control over its outer relays. Every warning, every emergency call, every plea moving in or out of human space would pass through Council hands first. Humanity would still be allowed to speak. It would simply speak through a hand on its throat. Mara let the chamber look at her before she spoke. Her dark suit carried no decoration beyond the blue-gray pin of Earth Mission Command. She had chosen that on purpose. No myths, no display, just a quiet signal that she represented a world that understood exactly how much weight this room could place on a single sentence. To her left sat Prosecutor Drental of the Council Review Office, long-necked and silver-eyed, with the calm manner of a predator who believed the room already leaned his way. Above the bench sat Chancellor Iller's son, who had ordered accelerated proceedings before Earth's delegation had even cleared orbital customs. That told Mara almost everything she needed to know. This was not a hearing drifting toward judgment. It was judgment arranged in advance. She also knew what the first hour had to accomplish. Listeners on Earth, neutral worlds, and smaller states too afraid to speak all had to understand the basics without strain. Who stood where? What was at risk? Why this was bigger than a dispute over machinery and codes. Drental rose and activated the central display. A lattice of glowing routes appeared, over a map of human space, then spread outward into the wider relay net. Envoy Voss, he said, his voice smooth and controlled. Do you deny that Earth maintained this unauthorized listening architecture over the last 9 standard years? No, Mara said. A ripple moved through the chamber. Shock from some. Relief from the opposing bloc. Curiosity from the undecided. Drental's mouth lifted slightly. He had expected denial. You admit, then, he said, that Earth created an unlawful system capable of receiving emergency traffic outside assigned jurisdiction. I admit Earth built a secondary network, Mara said. I do not accept your description of why it was built or what this case means. That slowed him for half a beat. It was enough. He moved into the evidence package. Relay identifiers. Maintenance invoices buried under civilian freight accounts. Energy draws from outer receivers. Signal capture logs. Most of it was real. Some of it had been arranged to sharpen the appearance of intent, but that was how council prosecutions often worked. They rarely needed to invent facts. They only needed to stack them. Mara listened without interrupting. She had spent 3 nights reviewing every line with her team aboard the Earth cruiser Meridian Ash, which held position beyond local weapons range under what the Council called escort protection and what everyone else would have called containment. They had marked every true point, every manipulated jump, and every omission. The first omission mattered most. The Council had described the hidden network as a tool of intrusion. It had not once described the kind of signal the network had actually been built to hear. That silence was already part of the case. When Drental finished, he spread his hands toward the bench. The architecture was deliberate, funded, compartmentalized, and concealed. Earth did not stumble into violation. Earth built a shadow instrument while benefiting from the trust of the interstellar order. He let those words sit. Trust. Order. In this chamber, those words were never neutral. Stronger blocks claimed them first, then lent them to weaker worlds when useful. Mara looked toward the 6th ring, where observer feeds projected summaries for public broadcast. Millions would be listening live, possibly billions. She imagined homes in Nairobi Arcology, labor decks above Luna, research stations around Callisto, and market halls on neutral moons, all hearing the same accusation. Humanity had cheated. Humanity had hidden something. Humanity, once again, was a species that had to be watched. Her first goal remained simple. Not victory. Time. Before the council treats this as settled, she said, I request layered review instead of summary judgment. The prosecution has shown that Earth built a system. It has not yet shown what that system was designed to hear, what legal environment made that system relevant, or why accelerated judgment was scheduled before full disclosure closed. That drew a sharper stir. She had not defended herself. She had challenged the sequence. Chancellor Illerson leaned forward. His face remained calm, almost elegant, the face of a statesman who believed the room should move at the speed of his intention. Envoy Voss, he said, this council will not be lectured on procedure by the accused. Mara met his gaze. Then the council should have no objection to following its own procedure. Silence fell more cleanly this time. Not a dramatic break. Just a pause deep enough for listeners to feel the pressure being applied to Earth. Illerson touched the edge of his bench. State your request precisely. Open review in layers, Mara said. First, the existence of the network. Second, its operational purpose. Third, the legal environment that made such a system relevant. Fourth, any allegation of harmful use. If Earth is to be judged publicly, the council can afford to be clear publicly. Her wording was careful. She did not ask for mercy. She asked for clarity. That was harder to refuse without sounding afraid of facts. Illerson did not answer at once. He looked toward Drentau, then toward the block seats occupied by the Core Meridian Coalition, the political center that had pushed hardest for human oversight after the Hadron border panic 2 years earlier. Mara recognized 3 delegates who had already circulated briefings describing Earth as strategically opaque. They were not here to punish a relay crime. They were here to reduce human autonomy while calling it stability. The Chancellor granted layered review, but only after warning that the Council retained authority to move directly to preliminary sanction. The warning was meant for her. The concession was meant for the room. Mara accepted both without expression. As the first segment paused for data authentication, her wrist implant gave a discreet pulse. A message had reached her from Meridian Ash through a narrow diplomatic band the Council had. Not yet sealed. Additional packet recovered. Suppressed routing tags confirmed. More soon. She did not look down twice. Her team had found something real. Not enough yet, but real. Somewhere inside the mountain of signal law and relay policy, someone had hidden routing tags that should never have existed if the Council's public emergency system had been functioning honestly. Mara let herself breathe once, slow and controlled. Earth looked weak in the room. That was acceptable for now. A weak defendant drew arrogance from the other side, and arrogance always loosens seams. She had come to prevent a verdict. That had not changed. But as the chamber lights shifted for the next phase, a larger question hardened inside the case. If the Council was rushing so hard to punish a hidden receiver, what exactly had it been afraid Earth might have heard? The second session began with less ceremony and more appetite. That suited Mara. When powerful systems sensed momentum, they often became less careful with their language. Drentau called up a series of statutes governing interstellar emergency traffic. He spoke as though giving a lesson to children who had wandered too close to live machinery. Distress networks, he explained, existed to prevent chaos. Relay priority existed to protect capacity. Jurisdiction existed to stop smaller powers from inserting themselves into crises they did not understand. The language sounded sensible until one listened too closely. Mara listened closely. He walked the chamber through the anti-cascade protocols, the post-war policies that had centralized emergency verification after false rescue pings had once drawn fleets into ambush zones. Then he reached the article Earth was said to have breached Article 41 of the Unified Signal Compact, which barred member world from maintaining hidden systems capable of receiving classified distress traffic outside assigned authority. It was a strong law, at least on the surface. Strong laws often hid rot better than weak ones. Mara waited until he finished. Then she asked one question. What class of signal was our network built to receive? Dren Tal folded his hands. Any distress traffic beyond human assignment. That is not a class, Mara said. That is a border description. A few heads turned. She could feel the public feeds locking onto the distinction. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed by a fraction. The distinction is irrelevant. It becomes relevant, Mara said, if the system was not designed to. Here, sealed military traffic or ordinary rescue calls, but a narrower category created by council policy itself. The chancellor cut in. State your claim plainly, envoy. I will, Mara said. After the prosecution states, plainly whether the council maintains filtered distress tiers that are not transmitted through the common emergency architecture. The chamber changed. It did not explode. Mature systems did not explode on first impact. They stiffened. Dren Tal answered with the care of a man stepping around a concealed blade. The council maintains prioritization matrices. Every large relay network does. Do those matrices include calls downgraded before open rescue dissemination? Some calls cannot be broadcast widely without destabilizing active sectors. That was the nearest he would come to a yes on his own. Mara turned slightly, so her voice carried to both the bench and the public rings. Then this case is no longer only about whether Earth heard signals outside our jurisdiction. It is about whether some distress signals were being buried before most of the galaxy could hear them. Several delegates spoke at once. Objections rose in layers. Dren Tal moved fast. That is a reckless distortion, he said. Prioritization is not burial. It is triage at civilization scale. Triage implies an attempt to save within limits, Mara said. We are discussing signals that vanished from the visible rescue stream. A delegate from the Core Meridian Coalition struck her desk light for recognition. Mara knew her at once. Delegate Sorith Vale, Transport Stability Specialist, and one of the loudest voices calling for sanctions after the border panic. Sorith Vale spoke without raising her voice. Even if such filtering exists, no member world has the right to circumvent it unilaterally. That way lies interstellar panic, false humanitarian entry, and opportunistic interference. Mara nodded once. That is a coherent argument, Delegate Vale. It is also a separate argument from the one used to bring Earth here today. The woman held her gaze. You are the one changing the argument. No, Mara said. I am identifying the hidden half of it. That landed. The Chancellor ordered restraint. The chamber settled, though not fully. Mara knew this stage well. Once a buried premise was named aloud, every party in the room began recalculating what the public might infer from it. She could not push too hard yet. She still needed proof solid enough to survive suppression. Dren Tal resumed with a new angle. He displayed human rescue movements in frontier sectors where official council relays had not authorized intervention. A tug convoy diverted through war haze to extract civilians from failing habitat. A hospital carrier took in refugees near a sanctioned quarantine ring. A stealth tender dropped supplies onto a moon under what the prosecution called signal uncertainty. Each action looked noble from one angle and insubordinate from another. Earth, he said, did not merely listen. Earth acted. It inserted itself into crisis zones based on information denied to other members. Hidden receivers created hidden policy. Hidden policy created hidden intervention. Mara had expected that line. She let him finish before answering. Yes, she said. In some cases, Earth acted. And why? Dren Tal asked. Would a member world conceal life-saving intervention unless it knew that intervention violated the common order? Because a member world that publicly admitted hearing forbidden calls would have lost the ability to hear the next one. That answer cut deeper than the last. It also carried risk. She had not intended to expose motive that early, but the room was already drifting toward the wrong simplification. Better to shape the moral ground now than let the prosecution own it. Sorith Vale seized on it. So Earth made itself judge over the rest of us. No, Mara said. Earth heard people crying for help in places your system had decided not to hear loudly. The word was sharper than her usual style, but still controlled. She had a sound steady enough to carry weight and honest enough to hold listeners who did not trust her. Her wrist pulsed again. Another narrowband message from Meridian Ash. Council internal filters probing Meridian Ash. Some archives under attack. Need stall. There it was. A second front, no longer theoretical. Someone in the Council security lattice had begun reaching for Earth's off-site records. This case was not just being argued in the chamber. It was being fought in the wires. Mara had to buy more time without looking desperate. She requested a review of chain of custody on the displayed human rescue movements. The Chancellor resisted. She pressed, not because the data was false, but because forcing authentication would consume minutes and expose how much of the prosecution's package had been rebuilt from selective tags rather than original relay tracks. During the verification lull, she studied the faces above. Not everyone opposing her was corrupt. That mattered. The true strength of the Council lay in how often ordinary functionaries could be made to defend terrible outcomes because those outcomes arrived dressed as process. That was one layer of the enemy. The second was clearer now. A political coalition wanted Earth humbled for strategic reasons. Humanity had grown too independent, too hard to predict, too willing to hold back force while building options quietly. Strategic restraint was being read as opacity by people who preferred obedience they could measure. The third layer remained mostly hidden. Someone, or several someones, had reason to fear the actual content of the buried signals. Not just the fact of them, their content. By the time the clerks finished, Dren-Tal had lost some of his smoothness. Mara moved before he could recover it. I request testimony from review archivist Len Orsat. The name landed badly across 3 benches at once. Good. She had picked the right witness. Len Orsat was a senior archive custodian, technically neutral, known for obsessive procedural loyalty. If he lied openly, everyone would hear the strain. If he told the truth, the structure around him would tighten like a net. He arrived under escort, a compact, gray-skinned official with translucent membranes over his eyes and a nervous habit of pressing one thumb against the opposite palm. Mara kept her questions narrow. Archivist Orsat, does the Council emergency architecture include filtered distress categories not forwarded into general rescue circulation? Yes, he said after too long. Mara did not let the silence grow. Are some of those categories redirected into restricted review rather than open rescue relay? Yes. Can member worlds with ordinary access see those restricted categories? No. Could a world hear such a signal if it built an independent receiver tuned to the proper bands and compression families? Orsat hesitated. Dren-Tal objected, but the Chancellor allowed the answer. In theory, Orsat said, yes. The chamber broke louder now. Not chaos, but the clean crack of a hidden fact becoming common property. Mara did not smile. Smiling at a moment like this would make her smaller. Dren-Tal rose immediately for redirect. He led Orsat through a chain that ended exactly where Mara knew it would. Yes, filtered categories existed. Yes, no single-member world had the right to seize them. Yes, the existence of restricted traffic did not legalize. Earth's secret network. All true. The witness, meant to steady the prosecution's case, ended up sharpening its stakes. When Orsat withdrew, the Chancellor announced an interval before the next phase. He said it was to maintain order. Mara knew it was to let the blocks align. As attendants shifted around the floor, her implant pulsed hard enough to be felt through bone. They hit Archive Wing C. We save copies. Need 10 more minutes. Mara kept her face still. 10 minutes could mean the difference between a hard reveal and a roomful of suspicion. She turned back toward the bench, just as Sorith Vale requested immediate preliminary sanction on grounds of admitted unlawful interception. The coalition wanted to freeze the case before deeper review spread any further. Mara spoke before the Chancellor ruled. Sanction Earth now if you wish, she said. But do it after the galaxy has heard one thing clearly. The network you call unlawful was built to hear calls your system did not pass on. If you punish that without examining why those calls disappeared, this hearing becomes a confession by the Council, not by Earth. The room stopped again. Not for long. Long enough. By the time the next phase opened, Meridian Ash had preserved the archive. Mara had bought her minutes. Now she had to spend them well. The chamber lights dimmed to presentation mode, and Mara knew the case had reached the point where plain speech mattered more than elegance. Listeners would forgive many things. They would not forgive confusion. She requested permission to present a limited context package on signal category architecture. The Chancellor tried to narrow her scope. She accepted every narrowing that did not touch the core. She had no interest in winning a procedural beauty contest. She wanted the room pinned to one fact. Earth had not built a hidden ear to steal secrets from neighbors. Earth had built it because some cries for help were being pushed below the line where help normally began. A grid appeared above the chamber. Not military routes. Not tactical maps. Just simple columns. Open rescue traffic. Military sealed traffic. Restricted quarantine traffic. And one final category that most public viewers had never heard named. Deferred distress. Mara kept her voice even. The prosecution has described our network as a system capable of hearing everything. That is inaccurate. The receivers Earth deployed were tuned, above all, to catch deferred distress packets, calls marked for restricted review rather than broad rescue relay. The phrase hit the chamber like cold water. Drenta l'objective instantly. The category name is misleading without historical frame. Then give it frame, Mara said. Explain it. He did not want to. That alone helped her. So she did it herself, carefully, with no flourish. After the Cascade Wars, the Council had created emergency filters to prevent false alarms from pulling fleets into traps. Over time, those filters grew more complex. Some signals were confirmed and broadcast quickly. Some were verified slowly. Some were sealed for military reasons. And some, under Article 19 Annex 4, could be deferred when open rescue action threatened what the law called systemic destabilization. That was the official language. In practice, a world in the wrong corridor during the wrong political standoff could scream into the network and find its signal slowed, thinned, or pushed into a review queue too narrow to see. Mara let the room absorb that before adding the next sentence. Earth discovered that pattern 9 years ago after 3 frontier incidents where local testimony described warning calls the open net showed no record of receiving. That short reorientation mattered. New secret. Clear reason. Clear action. Then she displayed the first match case. A mining habitat called Sealand Reach sat at the edge of a resource corridor disputed by 2 client states. Public record said the station had suffered a reactor fault before rescue assets could arrive. Private reconstruction, built from fragments Earth later captured, showed a clean distress pulse transmitted well within the survival window. Drental moved to interrupt. Mara spoke over the motion once, and only once. The call was not false. It was not corrupted. It was deferred. Chancellor Iller's son struck the bench for order. The chamber obeyed, though with difficulty. Soreth Vale rose again, her calm thinner now. Deferred does not mean ignored. It means evaluated against larger operational risk. Mara turned to face her directly. The people on Sealand Reach did not die inside a philosophical argument. They died waiting in an air ring that still had 41 minutes of life support when the first packet left the station. There was the first real emotional blow, grounded in time, not rhetoric. She had to be careful. Too much grief too early, and the opposing bloc would frame her as manipulative. Too little, and the truth would sound like policy trivia. Mara moved to the second case. A convoy moon near the Hadron transit seam. Public records said signal ambiguity under conflict conditions. Earth's reconstruction showed the original call had been marked authentic, then routed into restricted review after a trade stability office flagged the zone as sensitive to panic. She kept each example short. Name, place, what happened, what the system did, why it mattered. The listener had to track the pattern by ear. Then Drental countered with the argument Mara had always known would come. If Earth found such irregularities, he said, why conceal the discovery? Why build a sovereign system rather than petition the Council? Why rescue selectively and secretly? Why not bring this chamber the truth then? Because we were not strong enough then, Mara thought. Because this room protects itself. Because any species that speaks too soon can lose the only tool that lets it hear the next person begging for air. Instead of thinking it, she answered in layers. At first, we assumed error, she said. Then we found pattern. Then we faced a choice. Public accusation without durable proof would have ended in denial and sanctions. Quiet listening gave us evidence, and, in some cases, enough warning to act. So Earth placed itself above the law, Drental said. Earth placed people above a filter, Mara replied. The line moved through the room like current. She knew it would. She also knew it created danger. Powerful systems hated moral compression because it exposed choices they prefer to describe as mechanics. Iller's son finally intervened in person. He rose from the bench, tall and composed, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of a leader who had buried difficult decisions beneath polished language for decades. The envoy asks this chamber to believe, he said, that humanity alone discovered the tragic burden of Triov. She asks you to condemn every civilization that has ever had to choose which fire to reach first. Stability is not cruelty. It is the structure that prevents all fires from consuming all worlds. Many delegates nodded. Mara watched them closely. There was the strongest version of the opposing case, and it was not foolish. That was why it was dangerous. Iller continued. Yes, they're deferred signals. There must be. No network can act with infinite reach. No council can answer every cry at once without creating wars larger than the crises themselves. If Earth objected, Earth had avenues. Instead, it built a covert system and reserved to itself the right to know what others did not know. He turned toward the public rings. Do not confuse moral discomfort with moral superiority. Mara let his words settle. This had to be answered cleanly, not angrily. The Chancellor is right about one thing, she said. No network can save everyone. That surprised some of the room. The question before us is not whether choices must be made, she went on. The question is whether some lives were removed from common hearing for reasons called strategic before rescue was even allowed to try. That was the exact seam. Not impossible rescue. Prevented rescue. She displayed the extracted routing tags from Meridian Ash, now authenticated through 3 mirrored chains her team had fought to preserve. The tag showed that certain deferred distress packets had been copied into review paths linked not only to security analysis, but also to commercial transit and coalition stability offices. Murmurs spread wider. Several delegates were now reading rather than posturing. Then her implant pulsed a coded alert from Meridian Ash. Source challenge incoming. Security move probable. She knew what that meant. Someone would try to discredit the archive itself. Drental did not disappoint. He argued that Earth's routing tags could have been reconstructed from fragments, perhaps even engineered. He called for immediate seizure of Meridian Ash's data core under chamber authority. That was the move Mara had feared. If granted, the Council Security Office could swallow the record chain and bury it in procedural darkness for months. She did not have months. She might not have minutes. Mara requested testimony from one more witness, this time not one of her own. Review Comptroller Nerol Tove, a budget officer attached to emergency throughput allocation. Not glamorous, not political, the kind of official who noticed where capacity went because numbers had nowhere else to hide. Nerol Tove appeared irritated more than afraid. Mara liked that. Irritated witnesses often told the truth simply to end the performance. She asked about deferred distress review loads over the last decade. The comptroller confirmed volume spikes during major corridor tensions. She asked whether capacity existed to open more of those packets for general rescue dispatch. The answer was layered. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes no. She asked whether throughput decisions were influenced solely by rescue probability. Tove hesitated, then answered with fatal precision. No. Throughput weights also include market stability, treaty fragility, and escalation forecasts. A deeper sound moved through the chamber. Not outrage yet, but recognition. Rescue traffic had not merely been triaged by physical chance. It had been sorted through political consequence. Drin Tao redirected hard, forcing Tove to admit that those weights existed to prevent system-wide collapse. Again, the opposing side stayed credible. Mara did not fight that point. She used it. Then say it plainly, she said to the room. Some worlds were made quieter, so larger arrangements would not shake. No one answered immediately. For a moment, the whole hearing balanced on that absence. Then Illerson said, "If you wish to live in civilization, envoy, you do not get to pretend civilization has no price." Mara felt the weight of her next choice. She could keep this at the level of policy and win some undecided minds. Or she could move into deeper pain, which would expose not only the Council's choices, but Earth's own long compromise. She chose the harder road. "Then let us talk about price," she said. She called up the record from Kelson 9, a small agricultural moon in a buffer sector that nobody powerful had wanted to name in public. The file held a partial audio imprint reconstructed from packet residue and local backups. Not perfect, but clear enough. A tired voice identifying a failing life dome. A count of children present. A request for corridor clearance. Another voice in the background asking if anyone had answered. Then static. Then a later packet, weaker, still compliant, still asking. Mara did not play all of it. She played only enough. The room did not erupt. It froze. That was the first true stillness she had come for. And then Drin Tao did what a skilled prosecutor would do when wounded. He drove the blade sideways. If Earth heard this, he said quietly, and heard others like it, why did Earth keep silent for years? Why did Earth save some and not others? Why stand here now claiming conscience when humanity also chose, calculated, and withheld? He had struck the center. Mara had known he would. She had also known she could not avoid the answer without losing the moral ground entirely. She looked up at the listening rings and spoke as plainly as she could. Because Earth was not ready to survive this fight 9 years ago. Because if we came here with fragments, we would be crushed and the receivers would die. Because we could not save everyone. Because some of U.S. believed quiet rescue, where possible, was better than public defeat with no rescue at all. She paused once. And because that choice has stained us too. That was the moment the room needed. Not purity. Truth. A mature listener trusted admitted guilt more than polished innocence. Illerson saw the danger and moved to contain it. He requested immediate recess for security evaluation of all leaked materials. Security evaluation. Another phrase that sounded neutral while meaning suppression. Mara objected, but the Chancellor overruled and ordered a temporary seal on the archive under review authority. At once her implant flashed red. External access challenge accepted. Core lock imminent. The Council Security Office was moving on Meridian Ash now. Not metaphorically. In real time. Mara's team sent one final burst before the channel narrowed. We can preserve mirror chain, not chamber path. Need sovereign release authority or lose public proof. She understood at once. The next stage could no longer be about persuading the bench alone. The bench would stall, absorb, and bury. She needed a route around it that was lawful enough to hold and public enough to survive. The hearing had just changed from trial to race. During the sealed recess, the chamber emptied by degrees, but not by calm. Delegates clustered in ideological knots. Some looked offended. Some looked shaken. A few looked relieved in the ugly way officials look relieved when a private truth is finally too exposed to deny completely. Mara remained at her table until the immediate cameras pivoted away. Only then did she retreat to the consultation room assigned to Earth's delegation. A narrow chamber of polished stone with one translucent wall facing a control garden no one was free to enter. Her deputy, Tomas Valles, appeared on the secure hollow with compression noise streaking the edges of his face. He was aboard Meridian Ash, surrounded by slivers of light from emergency partitions. They've hit 3 archive mirrors, he said. We kept the source chain outside chamber custody, but not for long. Council security is petitioning local port authority to freeze our sovereign cores. Under mutual hazard doctrine. How much time? Mara asked. Maybe an hour before the legal shell closes. Less if Iller gets impatient. She sat, finally, but only because stillness helped her think faster. What survived, she asked. Tomas transmitted a compressed map. The routing tags. The comptroller correlations. The Kelso audio. And one more item we did not want to move until we had to. Mara studied the flag line. It was not merely a deferred signal log. It was a record of internal deliberation attached to one of the highest review channels in the emergency lattice. Her eyes narrowed. You verified this? 3 times. It came from an oversight ghost archive tied to the old sovereign audit provisions. Most of the council forgot those provisions existed. Earth did not. She almost smiled. Almost. What does it show? Tomas answered carefully, because the implication was too heavy to rush. A closed exchange between Chancellor Illersen's office, corridor stability planners, and emergency throughput review. It came from an outer corridor population cluster. They discussed suppressing broad rescue dissemination because mass disclosure would expose the fragility of a trade guarantee and could trigger defection among client worlds. Mara looked at him for a long second. It links directly to Iller? His office, yes. His authorization string is present. We still need one more validation pass on signature integrity. She exhaled. There it was. Not theory. Not structural cruelty in the abstract. A hand on the scale, attached to a person, attached to a choice. This was also the most dangerous evidence Earth had ever held. If we use it, Tomas said, we crossed the point of return. We crossed that point when they moved on the archives. He said nothing. He knew she was right. Mara ended the tactical call and requested a direct line to Ambassador Helena Ward on Earth, Senior Civilian Command. The connection took longer than usual, routed through 3 diplomatic relays the council could monitor but not lawfully block without open violation. Ward appeared in a plain office with no visible staff, which meant staff filled the rooms behind the walls. Tell me fast, the ambassador said. Mara did. She summarized the hearing, the exposed signal categories, the seizure attempt, and the internal exchange now in human hands. Ward listened without interrupting. That was one reason Mara trusted her. Weak leaders liked to interrupt reality while it was still forming. When Mara finished, Ward asked the only question that mattered. Can you prove enough publicly before they smother chain of custody? Yes, Mara said. If I can invoke sovereign emergency disclosure. Ward's face hardened. That right has never been used in the chamber. That is why it still exists. The ambassador leaned back slightly. If you invoke it, the council will claim Earth is detonating protected review law for political survival. They will claim that anyway. And if the evidence holds, then the issue stops being whether Earth built hidden receivers. It becomes whether the council used silence as policy and called it order. Ward considered that. You also realize this will expose our own years of concealment. Yes. Can you carry that openly? Mara looked through the translucent wall at the unreachable garden. Controlled growth under controlled weather, beautiful from a distance, useless to anyone on the wrong side of the barrier. I can, she said. I don't know if Earth can avoid it any longer. The ambassador gave formal authorization. No dramatic speech. No patriotic flourish. Just the weight of a state deciding that survival no longer lay in caution. When the call ended, Mara stood alone again. She thought of Kelsa 9, Seal and Reach. The unnamed calls that Earth's hidden net had caught too late, too weakly, or just in time for one quiet ship to divert and vanish from records. Humanity had not been innocent. Humanity had heard and chosen under limits, just as the council had. The difference, she believed, lay in the line between tragic inability and deliberate design. She returned to the chamber with that line clear in her mind. The sealed recess reopened under heavier security. 2 additional guard teams stood near the archive stations, which told Mara the bench feared not violence, but information. Chancellor Illerson announced that because irregular materials had entered proceedings, the chamber would suspend public dissemination of all new evidence pending review. There it was, cleanly stated. Public truth, once dangerous, would now be hidden for its own protection. Mara rose at once. Earth objects. The Chancellor did not even look at her fully. Objection noted. Noted is insufficient. He turned then, faint annoyance sharpening his tone. You are out of order. No, Mara said. I'm exactly in order. You are moving to seal evidence in a public judgment over sovereign rights, while citing emergency authority that was designed for tactical crises, not political embarrassment. A visible current ran through the lower rings. Iller's son struck the bench. Mind your phrasing. Mara did not retreat, then deny the substance instead. Drin Tal stepped in, tried to restore legal texture. He argued that no one was being denied due process. The materials would be reviewed, authenticated, and reintroduced if appropriate. Standard language. Deadly language. Mara had heard versions of it all her career. By the time dangerous truths returned if appropriate, the moment for consequence was gone. She placed both hands lightly on the podium. Then I invoke sovereign emergency disclosure under Audit Article 7, preserved by revision after the outer breach settlement. This time the chamber truly jolted. Not noise alone. Recognition. Alarm. Some younger aides clearly had to consult implants to confirm that the article even existed. Illersen's face changed for the first time since the hearing began. Only a little. Enough. That article is obsolete in practice, he said. Not in law, Mara replied. Audit Article 7 was an old compromise, created after a distant member world had been ruined by sealed reviews and falsified relay statistics. It allowed a sovereign delegation, under narrow conditions, to force a time-limited public release of evidence directly relevant to a chamber action affecting sovereign rights. It had once been considered dangerous, then unnecessary, then forgotten by those who had no use for it. Earth had remembered. Drental objected with everything he had. Improper scope, contaminated chain, security harm, diplomatic breach. Mara answered each point with tight legal footing and the political truth beneath it. If the council believes these materials are weak, she said, public release will expose their weakness. If the council fears public release before sanction, then the concern is not integrity. It is sequence. The undecided benches stirred. Sequence again. She kept bringing the room back to the same pressure point because repetition, used carefully, made structure audible. Iller's son could still overrule. He would pay for it, but he could. Then something Mara had hoped for, but not expected, occurred. Two peripheral delegations, small worlds with almost no influence in ordinary sessions, requested recognition at once. One had lost a colony during the Braille fever corridors. The other had spent years petitioning for more transparent rescue metrics. Their voices would not control the room, but they widened. The cost of suppression. The Chancellor saw the math change. If he denied disclosure too bluntly, he would turn suspicion into certainty. He granted the invocation under narrow time and relevance limits. Mara did not waste a breath. The public network brightened. Every ring in the chamber shifted to live, unsealed record mode. On worlds across the council sphere, on human stations, on ships in transit, anyone connected to Civic Feed now watched with almost no buffer left for selective editing. Mara began with the smallest necessary frame. Earth did build a hidden receiver network, she said. We built it to hear deferred distress traffic that the common system did not relay openly. We did not reveal that network sooner. That was our failure, and we will answer for it. But if this chamber is prepared to punish what Earth heard, it must first hear what its own system chose to quiet. Then she played the first set, not the most emotional, but the clearest. Routing maps, delay intervals, throughput weights, proof that deferred packets were not merely slow by accident, but steered by policy factors beyond immediate rescue viability. Drental interrupted repeatedly. Mara did not resist every interruption. She resisted only those that would blur the listener's path. Next, she showed the corridor correlations. Distress packet deferrals rising near trade guarantees, treaty stress points, and military reputational risks. The pattern was no longer tragic randomness. It was a system behaving in line with incentives. Only then did she bring out the last record. She warned the room once. The next file is narrow and severe. It is not presented to inflame. It is presented because it links policy theory to direct choice. The file opened as a closed communication strip between Emergency Throughput Command, Corridor Stability Planning, and the Chancellor's Policy Office. The text was spare, bureaucratic, almost bloodless. That made it worse. An outer corridor population cluster had emitted authentic distress after station failures and reactor loss risk. One note said open dissemination could destabilize confidence in corridor guarantees and trigger panic migration. Another suggested restricted review until trade continuity statement could be secured. A third, bearing the authorization trace from Illersen's office, approved temporary suppression of broad rescue routing pending strategic communication. Temporary, broad rescue routing, strategic communication. The chamber fell into a stillness Mara felt in her teeth. She did not speak over it. Silence had been the weapon in this story long enough. Now silence belonged to the listeners. Then the first questions came, not from Earth, but from other delegates. How long had such practices existed? Who else had authorized them? How many populations had been affected? Was this standard or exceptional? Did the Chancellor personally review the consequences? Iller's son rose slowly. He still looked dignified, which in some ways made his position more dangerous. Men like him rarely broke in public. They transformed necessity into argument. Yes, he said, my office authorized measures under extraordinary conditions. He did not deny the file. Yes, some distress traffic was delayed from broad dissemination when immediate release threatened cascading instability. And yes, I will defend that decision if the alternative is collapse across 10 sectors rather than tragedy in one. The words hit hard because they were sincerely cold. Mara answered from the floor beneath him. You are not defending impossible rescue choices, she said. You are defending the right to decide who may cry loudly enough to matter. He looked down at her. That is governance. No, she said. That is managed moral distance. The public rings flooded with unsorted reaction feeds. Private commentators had no time to wrap the moment in safe language. Small worlds began posting local archives, old anomalies, unanswered petitions, and vanished packet logs. The chamber could not hold the truth inside itself any longer. Once exposed, it bred witnesses. Drental tried one final legal containment. He argued that even if the council had misused deferral powers, Earth remained guilty of building an unlawful sovereign network. He was right, narrowly. Mara did not dodge. Then judge us for that, she said. Judge us for listening where we were forbidden to listen. Judge us for acting quietly when we lacked the power to challenge you openly. Judge us for choosing imperfect rescue over obedient blindness. But do not call this a case about hidden ears unless you are willing to say what those ears heard. The line moved through the chamber like a blade pulled free. While the bench deliberated, the chamber remained under residual public mode, and that changed the air in ways even seasoned delegates struggled to control. In most major hearings, the formal ruling period allowed blocs to regroup, quiet their own members, and flood public channels with prepared interpretations. This time the facts had reached a wider network too fast. No single office could frame them neatly before the first wave of ordinary witnesses arrived. Requests for recognition multiplied across the lower rings. The clerk tried to limit them. The attempt failed almost at once. The first new speaker was Representative Malin Suri of Cost Drift, a small water processing world rarely heard in chamber sessions. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she read from a local archive register. 6 years ago, she said, our outer desalination habitats suffered linked reactor failures during a dust season. We were told at the time that rescue delay resulted from transmission interference and navigational congestion. 3 years later, our technicians found partial outgoing packet traces that did not match the official report. We were informed those traces were corrupted echoes. She lifted a thin storage wafer for the cameras. We kept them anyway. Malin Suri continued. If the packet histories now being released show our calls were deferred for reasons outside direct rescue viability, then my world was not merely unfortunate. It was managed. That word struck harder than many others had. Managed. Not lost in chaos. Managed inside order. A second recognition request followed from the Terran Fold, a frontier medics coalition with observer status. Their speaker did not accuse. He simply listed dates where clinics had prepared for rescue ships that never came, despite later evidence that their outgoing compliance packets were valid. The sound of his voice mattered more than the content. He sounded tired, not theatrical. Tired people were hard to dismiss. Then, as Mara expected, the counterreaction came. Chief Security Administrator Varkel of the Council Internal Lattice requested direct response. He was not part of the original prosecution, which meant the deeper machinery of the institution had finally stepped into view. Thick-set and dark-scaled, with a voice like coarse fabric pulled over metal. Varkel represented the part of the council that believes systems survive by deciding what too many people did not need to know at once. He stood beneath the public ring and spoke to the chamber as though correcting a dangerous misunderstanding. What we are watching, he said, is not a revelation of hidden cruelty alone. It is also the uncontrolled release of raw crisis architecture. Distress review systems exist inside layers because malicious actors study those layers. Insurgent cells study them. Raider polities study them. Opportunists study them. The more you expose throughput logic in the name of conscience, the easier you make it to manipulate rescue behavior at scale. That argument landed with force. Mara felt it. Even some delegates, newly horrified by the deferral evidence, did not want to hand tactical maps to raiders. Varkel turned toward her. Envoy Voss has chosen the oldest, irresponsible luxury available to public morality. She has assumed that what is intolerable in secret becomes safe when shouted. Mara stepped forward before Drentau could reclaim the floor. No, she said. I assumed that a system using secrecy to hide political suppression could not be trusted to define necessary secrecy for itself. Varkel did not flinch. And who, precisely, do you trust with that definition? Earth, not Earth alone. Yet Earth kept the hidden receivers. Because the official channel had already taught us what happened when certain sectors cried for help. He spread his hands slightly. And now every pirate cell from here to the drift edge learns more about throughput waiting, review delays, and corridor sensitivities. There will be consequences for that too. Mara accepted the point in full view of the room. Yes, there may be. The admission checked him. She went on. But your argument proves the problem. You speak as though the only danger in a rescue network is external manipulation. There's another danger. Internal convenience. Political fear. Trade image. Delegations like mine did not invent that danger. We ran into it while following the ghosts of missing calls. Varkel turned toward the public rings, seeking larger ground. Civilization depends on trusted custodianship. If every member world builds its own hidden ear in the name of moral discomfort, the network fractures. Coordination dies. Panic spreads. Opportunists thrive. Mara answered in the same direction. Then trusted custodianship must be worthy of trust. The chamber was beginning to understand something that had not been visible at the start of the hearing. The conflict was not simply Earth against law. It was law as shield against chaos versus law as curtain over selective human cost. Both claims contained truth. The struggle lay in which truth had been allowed to dominate. Varkel tried one final pivot. You released protected materials to defend Earth's sovereignty. I released relevant materials to stop sealed judgment from becoming a way to erase the reason Earth resisted that judgment. By stepping forward, he had made the institution's third layer visible. Tomas sent her a brief text burst while the chamber filled with renewed debate. Multiple outer sectors uploading corroboration. This is beyond chamber control now. Mara read it once and set it aside. Control was exactly what the old order had mistaken for legitimacy. The waiting period stretched. In that time, the public feed did something the council had never intended. It turned a formal hearing into a shared memory exchange across worlds that had not realized their private losses might belong to a pattern. Many carried the same shape. A valid packet, a review delay, a later explanation that hid the original decision path. During a temporary pause, Drentau approached her position under clerk observation. You understand, he said, that once this spreads fully, there will be genuine emergencies made worse by collapse of trust in the relay network. Perhaps, Mara said, and that some lives lost later will be attributed to what you did today. Perhaps. He studied her with something more complicated than hostility. You are either reckless or remarkably willing to carry hatred. I am willing to carry the hatred that belongs to a difficult truth more than the gratitude attached to a clean lie. For the first time all day, the prosecutor looked almost tired. I did not build the architecture, he said. No, Mara said. You defended it. He left her then, and Mara felt no triumph. Drintow was not the deepest enemy in the room. The bench took far longer than expected to return. As the delay stretched, memories Mara had kept tightly ordered began pressing upward. Perhaps that was because waiting always made room for the past. She remembered the first confirmed deferred packet Earth had caught years earlier. She had not been senior envoy then. She had been a strategic counsel in a low-lit room beneath Mission Command, watching analysts replay a dying habitat call frame by frame while older officials argued over what hearing had obligated them to do. Some had wanted disclosure. Others had wanted the receivers shut down before Earth drew wrath it could not survive. In the end, humanity had chosen the path most adult and most compromising at once. Keep listening. Verify pattern. Rescue where quiet action had a chance. Speak later when speaking might actually change something. Mara had agreed then. She still believed that logic had not been childish or cowardly. But logic did not cancel cost. She remembered one mission in particular. A medical lift through a stormed freight corridor, launched off official books, because a deferred clinic packet had reached Earth's hidden net with just enough location integrity to matter. The ship had returned half full. It had saved 63 people and arrived too late for 100 more. The captain's report, classified for years, contained a sentence Mara had never forgotten. We were not enough, but at least we were real. That sentence had haunted Earth policy more than any speech could. Quiet rescue was not enough. When the bench doors finally reopened, the chamber straightened almost as one body. Mara felt all the scattered testimony of the delay fold back into the formal center, where law would now try to catch up with truth. By then, the hearing was no longer only a dispute over legality. The public network remained alive under Article 7's residual visibility clause. Delegates spoke in clumps. Analysts pulled at files. Old petitioners surfaced from obscurity. Three-member World announced they were submitting archived signal complaints for immediate review. Another demanded suspension of corridor confidence protocols pending investigation. Meridian Ash signaled that external seizure orders had stalled. Too many eyes now. Too many law nodes recording every move. Mara finally allowed herself one long breath. Tomas reappeared on Hollow. Exhaustion cut into his face. You did it. No, she said. I forced them into daylight. That is not the same as winning. He gave the tired half-laugh a man who knew she was right. She watched the chamber while waiting for the ruling. She saw outrage and another kind of fear. Not fear of Earth. Fear of what else the system might look like once its sealed corners were opened. Once pattern appeared, conscience became contagious. When the bench returned, the result was necessarily ugly, because real institutions under public shock rarely produced clean endings. The Council did not absolve Earth entirely. It formally acknowledged that humanity had violated Signal Compact law by maintaining covert receivers outside common governance. It reserved future review on the question of unauthorized interventions, but it rejected preliminary sovereign sanctions. It suspended immediate action against Earth's external relay rights. It ordered temporary nullification of the deferral provisions most clearly tied to political suppression. It established an independent cross-sector inquiry with mandatory public accounting of affected distressed traffic, and it required all relevant offices, including the chancellors, to surrender records under live oversight. Then came the sharper blow. Pending investigation, Chancellor Illerson was stripped of emergency throughput authority. The chamber did not cheer. This was not that kind of room, but a pressure deep inside it broke. Illerson stood through the ruling without visible collapse. He even inclined his head, as though accepting an unfortunate but comprehensible burden. Mara knew men like him could survive disgrace if the structure that made them remained intact. That was why she kept listening for the rest. The last ruling mattered almost as much as the first. Audit Article 7, dormant for generations, was reaffirmed as valid sovereign protection in cases where sealed evidence intersected with public judgment over member rights. Earth had not just survived the hearing. It had reopened a door the council had hoped was bricked shut. When the session closed, delegates surged toward private exits and press corridors. Mara remained at her station a moment longer because victory, if this was victory, did not feel clean. Humanity had not walked into the chamber shining. Earth had kept its own silence for years. Some lives had been saved in that shadow. Others had still been lost. There would be human critics asking why the truth had taken so long. They would not be wrong. But there would also be people alive tomorrow because the next deferred packet might no longer die inside a review queue built to protect confidence before life. That mattered more than moral comfort. As attendants cleared the floor, Sorith Vale approached from the coalition benches. Up close, she looked older than she had from distance. Not in years. In the way institutional certainty ages when it cracks. "I push for sanction," she said. "I know. I thought opacity was the danger. It was a danger. She absorbed that. You're not interested in pretending Earth was pure. No." A faint, humorless motion touched her mouth. "That may be why you succeeded." Mara did not answer. Sorith glanced once toward the emptied Chancellor's bench. The world at the center tell themselves collapse is always one irresponsible disclosure away, she said. It becomes easy, after enough years, to call every buried thing a load-bearing secret. "And then you stop hearing people," Mara said. Sorith held her gaze a moment, then left without offering alliance or apology. That was fine. Mature endings did not require everyone to cross the room and become friends. Mara finally stepped away from the podium. The chamber seemed physically smaller now, though perhaps only because its myth had shrunk. Her route back to the delegation corridor took her under the public rings, where the feed nodes still glowed with unsorted reactions from across known space. Human stations, freight crews, colony councils, fringe medics, small species representatives who had learned long ago to lower their hopes before contacting the center. The galaxy was speaking over itself now, untidy and alive. Halfway down the corridor, Helena Ward reached her on secure line. "It holds," the ambassador said without preface. "Emergency councils are convening across 3 sectors. Independent press networks are duplicating the archive. Even worlds that dislike us are demanding packet release." Mara leaned against the wall only after checking that no camera watched the moment. And Earth. Relieved, furious, divided, proud in the way people get proud when they also feel indicted. That sounds honest. It is. There will be hearings at home, too. There should be. Ward was silent for a beat. "I want that on record, by the way. You are recommending internal review." "Yes." "Good. We're not going to survive this by acting shocked that compromise leaves stains." Mara closed her eyes briefly. Fatigue had finally reached her bones, now that the race had ended. "You did what we needed," Ward said. Mara answered slowly. "I did what the moment allowed. What we needed was 9 years ago. Maybe, but 9 years ago the room would have crushed us. That does not restore the dead." "No," Ward said. "It doesn't. But it may stop the next queue from swallowing the living." After the call, Mara continued toward the diplomatic exit, escorted now not by guards pressing her inward, but by neutral officers who treated her with the brutal respect reserved for people who had just altered procedure in a place built on procedure. Outside the chamber complex, Astor Prime's evening traffic moved through the capital sky in bands of controlled light. Council towers still looked eternal from the outside. They always would. Systems that span worlds do not fall, because one hearing exposes a wound. They bend, absorb, rename, and continue. Humanity had not broken the council. Humanity had forced it to hear. That was enough for one day. At the final checkpoint before her transport, A junior attendant approached, clearly uncertain whether protocol permitted the interruption. The attendant belonged to a small member world Mara did not recognize at once. Envoy Voss, the attendant said, voice tight with nerves, my home sector has kept copies of old, unanswered relay petitions. We did not think anyone would ever ask for them seriously. Someone is asking now. Mara looked at the young official and saw the real aftershock of the hearing. Not the chancellor's humiliation. Not the legal clauses. This. Doors inside frightened systems opening just wide enough for memory to move. Send them, Mara said. The attendant nodded and hurried off. Mara entered the transport at last. The door sealed. Sound dropped. For the first time since the session began, no audience watched her face. She sat alone and let the quiet settle. She thought of the first packet Earth had caught years ago. The disbelief. The second packet, which made it pattern. The internal debates. The fear that if humanity spoke too soon, it would lose both standing and access. She thought of the missions launched under deniable cover because the right thing could not survive daylight yet. The names not spoken publicly because rescue had failed or arrived late. The temptation, always present, to call caution wisdom forever. She also thought of the line she had drawn in the chamber, the one that mattered more to her than any tactical success. Not the line between innocence and guilt. That line had never belonged to this case. The line between not being able to save everyone and deciding some people should not be heard clearly enough to trouble the powerful. That line was where the hearing had truly been fought. The transport merged into the capital traffic stream. Through the side panel, Mara could see the council district receding, luminous and orderly, as if nothing inside it had shifted. But she knew better. Somewhere in that city, clerks were reopening archives they had never expected to expose. Somewhere in the outer sectors, station managers were checking old logs against newly public packet histories. Somewhere on Earth, listeners who had entered the hearing thinking this was about illegal receivers now understood that the receivers were only the door. Mara rested her head briefly against the seat and let exhaustion pass through her without. Resistance. The story would not end neatly. Earth would face scrutiny. Some allies would keep their distance. Some enemies would adapt quickly. The inquiry itself might be diluted, slowed, or redirected. There would be new games, new phrases, and new attempts to bury by classification what could no longer be buried by silence alone. But the old certainty was gone. The galaxy had heard the shape of the lie in its own voice. And humanity, so often treated as a species too stubborn, too secretive, too hard to fold cleanly into polite order, had done what it did best under pressure. It had endured suspicion, held its ground, admitted its own compromise, and then forced a larger system to face what it had made ordinary. When the transport docked with the human mission tower, Tomas was waiting in the reception corridor, tie crooked, eyes red from sleepless strain. He did not salute or posture. He simply stood there, looking like a man who had lived through a storm and did not yet trust the calm. We have full duplication across 12 nets, he said. Security cannot put this back in the box. Good. And 3 corridor worlds are already asking whether Earth will share receiver design principles for temporary civilian audit nodes. Mara considered that. Another frontier opening. Another risk. Not yet, she said. No impulsive hero weeks. We build the oversight fight first. Tomas nodded. He had expected that answer. As they walked deeper into the tower, staff made room for her in the halls. No one cheered. They were too old for triumph without inventory. In the operations room, wall feeds showed every angle at once. Human pundits, alien analysts, legal experts, frontier citizens weeping in relief or fury. Council loyalists insisting the system had done its painful best. Survivors of deferred zones holding up old packet receipts to cameras. Mara watched for a moment, then reached to mute the room. Silence fell, this time chosen. We start our own review tonight, she said. Every hidden intervention, every internal argument, every case where we heard and could not act, and every case where we decided not to disclose. We do not survive this by acting cleaner than we were. No one objected. That, more than anything, told her Earth might deserve the second chance the hearing had bought. She dismissed the team and remained by the dark wall screens. After the others left, outside the mission tower, Aster Prime turned under a sky crowded with structured light, the capital of an order still vast, still dangerous, and still unwilling to surrender power gracefully. Mara stood there a long time, not mourning exactly and not celebrating. The dead in the deferred queues would not come back, because one chamber had finally gone still. The worlds bent by quiet decisions would not heal overnight. Humanity would continue to face a galaxy that preferred humans grateful, supervised, and slightly ashamed. But shame had shifted sides now. And once a great system has to hear the names it taught itself not to hear, it never becomes fully deaf in the same way again. Earth did not leave that chamber as the strongest power in the galaxy. It left as the voice that refused to stay silent when silence had already cost too many lives. And maybe that was the real turning point. Not the ruling, not the scandal, not even the fall of men who thought order mattered more than mercy. The real turning point was simpler than that. For the first time in a very long time, the galaxy was forced to listen to the voices it had trained itself to ignore. Some systems survive by control. Some leaders survive by delay. Some empires survive by teaching themselves not to hear suffering until it becomes politically convenient. But humanity survived for a different reason. Because even when it was outnumbered, distrusted, and pushed into a corner, it still chose to listen. And once a species learns to hear the truth clearly, it becomes very hard to bury. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share it with someone who loves science fiction, and subscribe to the channel for more journeys through the Galaxy Council, Earth, and the stubborn strength of humanity. And if this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. Was Mara Voss right to reveal the truth when she did? Or had Earth already waited too long? Because in a galaxy built on silence, sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is make sure the next cry for help is heard.